Okay, everybody, welcome to the Forge. I have to be honest, selfishly, today we're going to talk about mental performance for flying. And as I think most people that listen to this podcast know, I'm a pilot. And of course, our guest today is also a pilot. Not only that, but she teaches people how to fly. And not only that, but the mental performance of it. So again, selfishly, I want to get some free coaching today. So but I hope that everybody can say, wow, number one, I hope it's interesting to you, even if you're not a pilot. But number two, I think that the principles of mental performance, in my humble opinion, are pretty universal. And so try to pick out those things that Tammy and I talk about today that you can apply to your life. And we'll try to emphasize those as much as we can. But I'm gonna have a little fun today. So with that being said, Tammy, welcome to the Forge. We're happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'm gonna jump right into, I look on your LinkedIn profile and you say you're a mental coach for aviators. I have to say I've never seen that title. I love it. Obviously, myself being I'm going to use the word aviator, even though maybe I haven't earned it. But what does that entail? Who's your ideal client?
Yeah, well, I like to think about how professional athletes they all have mental performance coaches because the mental side of the game is extremely important. And I have discovered that I feel exactly the same way about flying, that the mental performance side of aviation is extremely important. Think about the aspect of flying. You can't just pull over on a cloud when things get tough. You have to push through it. And the more you're prepared to push through the challenges, the more prepared you'll be to fly. Ultimately, you'll be safer flying, more confident, more prepared for each flight, more prepared for every check ride. And this came about simply because I realized developing my keynote on perseverance that a lot of what I had been doing was mental performance related. And that when I was teaching and pilot training I think it was a total of 11 years, and I taught in other aircraft too, but pilot training specifically, I focused a lot. I was doing mental performance coaching and I didn't even realize it until I look back on it. So I thought that was very interesting. I thought, you know what, I need to expand this. So ideally, my ideal client is any aviator. When you say aviator, I say, student pilot, upgrading pilot, instructor pilot, anyone who just wants to be better in the cockpit, more confident, more safe. That's my ideal client.
I'm smiling because I think this is great. I've always thought about, there was a time when I thought about becoming a flight instructor. And I said, all right, if I'm gonna be a flight instructor, I'm gonna teach leadership right along with learning how to fly an airplane. I never did go down that path, but I'd be great if, quite honestly, if flight instructors taught a little bit more of that, not only the mental performance, but the leadership aspect, leading yourself, which I think would not only make better aviators, but just as you might guess, better people in general. It's funny listening to you. I built my own airplane, and I remember I was the test pilot on the first flight, and for some reasons that I had some things not set up the right way on my first flight. And although I seen my airspeed indicator come alive on my takeoff roll, once I got airborne, it went away. And I said, wait a minute, I don't have airspeed. And so here I am flying an airplane I've never flown before, first flight, and I don't have airspeed indicator, which is not the end of the world, but it's still enough to get your attention. And I remember very specifically saying, well, Ron, nobody's coming to help. You've got to figure this out, and you got to get on the ground, and you can't just pull over like you would a car. So it's an interesting thing when you're a pilot. Some of those things aren't at your option, and you just have to make it work. So I love that you say that. What drew you? Obviously, I think people get this already. You were in military aviation. What drew you to that career path? What was the driving force?
So the main driver was wanting to serve my country. When I was in high school, I was going to college full time as a program they had in Minnesota. And I thought I really want to go in the military. It's very intriguing to me. The idea of serving my country, being part of a team, just the organization and discipline of it all just fit me and my personality. And I thought, I want to do this. And I met a guy who was in the Navy in one of my college classes. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about the military and I'm thinking Navy. And he said, I really think you should think about the Air Force. And I said, well, why? And this is about probably 1994 at the time. And he said, well, they treat their people better, they're cleaner, and they're more advanced with how they're treating women at this point. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. So I had never known anyone in the military. So I went to the Air Force ROTC detachment at the University of Minnesota because there was no question I was going to get a degree. So I wasn't going to just go enlist. So I went to that detachment and just said, I want to serve my country. I'm ready to join this program. They told me about it. They said I could try it. If I didn't like it, I could quit. And they also asked me if I wanted to be a pilot, because that's what they ask everyone. And I had never thought about it. I mean, I really didn't. I didn't know any pilots, let alone female pilots. And come to find out, they said I was ineligible. I had ACL reconstruction on my left knee and I couldn't do it. So that was the end of that. Well, I went to field training, which is like ROTC boot camp. It was at Lackland Air Force Base in the middle of summer, Texas, 4 weeks, doing the drill and the obstacle courses and push-ups and marching, all that. And they had a career day and there was 200 cadets in the audience, a couple panel members, only one pilot. And he just so happened to point right at me. And he said, are you going to be a pilot? And I looked at him and I said, I can't. I said, I had knee surgery. And his reply was what started it all. He said, there's pretty much a waiver for everything. So I wish I'd learned that lesson then, but I didn't. But I did go back to the detachment and asked if we could find out about this waiver, because truly, when I started to really process it, I was a roller coaster kid. I was a gymnast. I was a tree climber, just an all around adventure. And this seemed like, I thought, wow, this is actually a really great idea. And they looked into it and found out that I was eligible the entire time. It was such a common surgery. And so I just did all the testing. And at that point I applied and I got a pilot slot, and it really it went from there.
Wow. Well, number one, I'm thinking, why in the world would an ACL surgery prevent you from being a pilot? That's the first thing that comes to mind. I know the military has sometimes some strange, things. I think it's getting better. It's
Yes.
some strange things though to I don't know, roadblock you from being a pilot. But I'm glad you found that way around it. And as I always like to say, it's always fascinating to me how one little thing like that. What if you'd have never asked that question
Yep.
and brought that to your attention? And quite honestly, whatever his motive was behind that, thank goodness he did, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's true. That's happened quite a few times in my life.
Um, let's again go into my selfish side. So you were an instructor pilot in the T-38. I have quite a few friends that flew the T-38. What would you say about the T-38? What's it like to fly the T-38?
It's awesome. I mean, I think one of the coolest things, my absolute favorite thing, when people say, do you miss flying? Because I actually don't fly anymore. I say I do. And what I miss the most is formation. Formation is my absolute favorite thing to do in the world. It's like this extremely challenging, aggressive, yet requiring finesse maneuver. To have aggression and finesse together, it's just awesome. And it's so challenging and so much fun. That's definitely my favorite thing. But I think, flying the T-38, especially in formation, is amazing. And I think just simply the challenge of landing it is one of the most difficult aircraft to land in the whole Air Force inventory, landing at speeds of 160 knots. It's really, really quite fast. And the wings are very small, so there's not much forgiveness.
Oh my goodness. Yes. If for the non-pilots out there, I mean, it kind of looks like a little rocket with these stubby little wings, really short wings. And we'll get to, I'm glad you kind of planted that seed for formation flying. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I want to stick with, I've flown two aircraft that had a roll rate of about 400 degrees per second. And I'll tell you, for anybody that hasn't experienced that, that's fast. Quite honestly, 400 degrees per second. If you're not ready for it, your head will smack against the plexiglass canopy, because you can't hold your head, from moving. And the T-38 is way above 400 degrees per second. What is the roll rate of the T-38?
Oh, you had to go there, didn't you? I have no idea. I don't know. I just know it's
I
super fast.
Yes, here's what I know, and I had to do a little research. It's 720 degrees per second. So that's two times around in 1 second. So, half a second it's going around one revolution. I've been told, and I don't know, you tell me, Tammy, I've been told, and I don't know if this is a urban legend, that they pretty much tell you don't do a full deflection roll in the T-38. Is that true?
You can't do multiple. I mean, you can do one, but I mean,
Okay.
you better be ready to reverse it right away.
Wow. That's
It's
just
actually a
crazy.
prohibited maneuver to do it multiple times. I don't remember the exact verbiage, but
Huh. And so that's the stepping stone into what? Does everybody have to fly the T-38 in the Air Force, or who
no.
who were your students?
Well, at the time, it's since changed now. Supposedly, what I understand is they'll go through the primary trainer, which is the T6, and then they split off in their tracks depending, and they get their wings at that point, and then they split off into tracks, whether they're going to the heavies or they're going to fly fighters. When I was teaching and when I went through, what would happen is I went through the T-37, which was the primary trainer when I went through, but it's now replaced by the T6. It was a 2-engine low-wing aerobatic jet. No G suit, but it pulled G's, and you had to wear the whole getup with the mask and all that. And then at that point, you're based on your performance, your preference, and your instructor's goals, like based on your performance, like what they thought of you, you got track selected into different programs. So I was track selected into the T-38, which is the fighter at the time, the fighter bomber trainer. And it's still the fighter trainer. I'm not sure about the bomber side of it, because bombers are a lot bigger. Sometimes they can go through the T1 and move on, which is like more of a corporate jet, but you have to fly the T-38 and to go fly fighters. It's essentially a fighter trainer. And one thing I like to point out to people is a lot of people have seen the movie Armageddon. And in the movie, before they actually go up in space, they go in a little fighter jet. And that's NASA's T-38. It's exactly the same, except it has beefed up engines. So that's the same airframe that I flew, if you've seen Armageddon.
Nice. I forgot about that. That's a good visual of that plane. So anyway, so you're an instructor pilot. What is there anything that you would point to was maybe common mistakes that new pilots, when they were flying with you, what was the common mistakes that you saw? Was there a trend, or was it all over the place?
I don't know about like flying wise necessarily if there's a trend, but I think that one thing that is a trend, and this applies outside as well, not just flying, it's everywhere, but is just a lack of confidence. One of the things that we would always tell the students, and I was told as a student as well, be confident. And I find it extremely difficult, for some students, to include me, to be confident when I haven't proven to myself yet that I can do something. That was very challenging. And it really wasn't until I was several years into my career and flying the A-10 that I kind of learned the lesson in confidence and how to build it. I was in Korea flying the A-10, and I was studying in the vault, it's just a locked up room that you can only go in if you have a security clearance. But the weapons officer, who's the chief instructor pilot in the squadron, he walked in and he asked a question, and I immediately knew the answer, but I paused. And in my pause, one of the other students answered, and he answered incorrectly. But I realized that if I hadn't known the answer myself, I would have completely thought his answer was correct. And I thought, well, wow, this is what they're all doing. That's what everyone else is doing. They're just answering as if whatever comes to their mind and whatever they say is right. And I'm not saying they're just throwing random numbers or answers out there. They're educated guesses, and it makes sense. That still didn't solve my problem, though, because even though I knew what they were doing, I didn't know how to overcome it. Because why was I not doing that? It wasn't until I realized the root cause, which is always important, find the root cause of whatever the problem is. The root cause for me was that if I didn't know the answer 100%, could see it in the book, wherever it was written, I felt like I was lying if I spit it out with confidence. There was a mismatch in my brain. And I had to make a very conscious decision to overcome that. And I did. I made an intentional decision. You know, you make a decision back here, and then you just don't waver from it once you make that educated decision. So I made this choice that if at any point somebody asked me a question and something popped into my brain, even if I wasn't 100% sure, I was going to answer confidently. And it was incredible. In fact, what I discovered was that I'm guessing here, obviously 90% of the time, whatever that number was or whatever that answer was that popped in my brain, that oftentimes I went, well, that's probably not it, was correct. Our brains are really very incredible, and we just need to trust them a little more. And that ultimately that built more confidence and more confidence. And, you know, the same thing in pilot training, I would tell the students, you need to answer with confidence. Look at it from my seat. If as an instructor, your student looks at you and says, well, I think that it's 75. Does that give the instructor a lot of confidence that you're going to go out in that jet and take care of business? Not really. So I taught them to answer with confidence, and we talked about the whole lying and thing, and like that it's not lying. It's, you know, it's just a way to overcome your own doubts and build your own confidence.
Well, this is a great topic. This is fascinating to me, but let me pause. You know, one of the things that you're probably aware of, Tammy, I mean, part of what we do at Forging Metal is really try to emphasize female leadership. And I know from teaching at the university and some of the stuff that I've read that women, and again, I'm generalizing here, but women typically are more reluctant to take a job that they're not either 100% qualified for or really close to 100%. Whereas men will step into, yeah, I'll apply for that job, even though I really know I'm not, quite qualified, but they'll step into that more often. And I always like to kind of, counsel my students, my female students is, step up, even none of us are ever going to have that perfect situation, and to step into that and maybe, have confidence, like you're saying. I think that could, I don't know, solve a lot of maybe the problems. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. When I learned that same fact that you're talking about, I can specifically remember looking at a job and seeing the word requirements. And I was like, well, I don't have that, so I can't apply. To me, a requirement it's black and white. It's a requirement. And I find it interesting that people will be like, I can figure that out, or that's good enough, I'm going to try. I think it's awesome, but I didn't know that. I am very, very black and white. And sometimes I have to get outside my comfort zone in the sense of like pushing the rules, like the whole waiver thing. There are multiple times in my career that I didn't realize that I could even ask for a waiver. For example, when I had cervical spine reconstruction in 2006, the regulations stated I needed to be grounded for 6 months. Well, in the A10, landing currency is 6 months, which if I lose my landing currency as an inexperienced pilot, which I was at the time, I had to go back to full training again, the whole shebang of going through A10 training as if I'd never flown it before. And so, obviously they had me fly right before the day before my surgery, just literally take off, land, update my landing currency. That's it. But then the DNIF period 6 months from the surgery, which was after that. So there was a problem. So that was at a point where I actually went and I sought out flying unmanned platforms in the Air National Guard. And I transitioned to that platform. And while I was in training, I was waiting to fly this unmanned platform, but I still needed to get cleared to fly. So I was working with the flight docs. I'm like, can you just clear me like as if I'm a heavy pilot? I don't need this 6-month period for my neck. And they're like, he goes, well, hey, why don't we just send you to Wright Pat, have him check you out and get you a waiver for the 6 months? I'm like, that would have been really good to know before I left the A10 community, because he was thinking, well, I'll get you back in the A10. I'm like, so again, like these black and white rules, I didn't understand you could stretch things. So I would say advice to everyone, ask that question. Don't let it take 15 years or your career to go, hey, is there a waiver for this? Can we get an exception to this? Because not all policies are the end all be all. And that's how I operated at the time.
I like that. Even though, maybe that's not a term that everybody that's not in the military would say, well, yeah, I've never thought about a waiver, but hey, you could apply this to life, right?
Yes.
Maybe that's the saying that you need to take away. Is there a waiver that I can have? Yeah, I think it goes to the heart of this idea of, when I'm doing coaching with people and they say, "Well, I can't do that." And I go, "How do you know? Have you tried?" And it's really easy. You see the roadblock and you go, "Okay, well, I can't get around that." Well, have you tried? And I think maybe that's the takeaway here is maybe you can't get around it, but give it an effort before you just kind of put your hands in the air and say, "I can't do that." And I don't again, I always feel like I'm being judgmental here. I'm not trying to be judgmental in the fact I've done this too. It's really easy to take that path of saying I can't do it. So I
Yeah.
think that's a great life lesson. Let's continue with confidence. You know, I teach everything from undergraduate, engineers that are 20 years old to graduate students, and then of course my coaching is all across the board. But especially with my undergraduate students, they go, "Well, Ron, I don't have any experience, so how can I have confidence?" What would be your answer to whether, and I don't like to use age so much, but you're just wherever you're at in life and you go, "You know what? I don't feel like I have enough or enough experience to be confident." What's your answer to that?
Well, I think it depends on where they are. That always, there's that it depends answer. Like, are they not confident because they've never done it or they don't have the experience yet? But regardless, I think how do you get anywhere if you don't try? And so my advice to that is take on the idea of visualization, truly, the whole manifestation thing. And it doesn't have to, like, some people hear that word and they're like, oh, that's all, meditation, manifestation. It's just the idea of like putting yourself in that place and seeing yourself there and doing it regularly. And you can build confidence that way. I mean, there's the whole fake it till you make it, fake it till you become it. I don't like the word fake it, but the truth is you can be confident in your own, like, your history and how have you performed before. You can, one thing I like to say is use other people's confidence in you to drive your own energy and own confidence. For example, when I was 7 months pregnant, 5 months pregnant with my second baby, I was asked to go to weapons school, which is essentially the Top Gun program for the Air Force. And I did the math, and they were asking me to go when my babies would be 18 months and 3 months old. And I almost immediately said, F no. And I almost never swear. So that was me. I basically just went right into the problem and said, nope, this is an unsolvable problem. And I didn't even try, but I didn't answer that way because I didn't want to respond emotionally. So I waited and I talked to my husband and he told me, I told him about this, kind of like laughing, guess what they want me to do. And he said, you have to go. You have to go. You cannot turn this down. And my lesson in this is that I didn't believe in myself at all. And so often society is like, well, you got to do everything on your own. And if you don't believe in yourself, you shouldn't be doing it. Well, the truth is we all have those moments. But if you have a network of people you can trust who say, hey, give it a shot, I believe in you, take that. And I did apply and I did go. And it was really hard. But he believed in me. And I said, okay, if you believe in me, I'm going to go. I'm going to do this. So I would say use multiple tools.
Excellent, excellent. And on previous podcasts, I had a discussion where I said, the phrase "I believe in you" is underused and incredibly powerful when it's coming from the right person. So,
Yeah.
kudos to your husband for saying that. And I would say I agree. Sometimes we need that nudge. It would be nice if life worked that way, that we always had supreme confidence and we never needed that nudge. But that's not the way it works. And so I think surrounding yourself with people that will give you that nudge when you need it is great. So good stuff there. And so let's kind of move. I like that you said I don't like fake it till you make it. I don't necessarily, I like fake it till you become it a little bit better, but I just don't like the word fake.
I know.
So I was smiling when you said that, because I say, be authentic. But I do believe, and this is just my thoughts, maybe to add to yours, when students ask me this, I say, well, we can do some of it. We can do some manifestation. We can do some visualization. We can do some coaching, and that will help get you some confidence. But at the end of the day, this is my belief. You are not going to get the full confidence you need until you go out there and, as I say, engage in battle. And we get skin knees and we fall down and we fail. But that's how you get it. But I'll tell you, for somebody that teaches leadership, I'm learning that even if you're an idiot, confident idiots, people follow confident idiots.
They-
Confidence has a lot of power with people, and it can be used for good or bad. And I'm not certainly telling people to use it for evil, but I, my point is confidence is incredibly powerful when we're talking about leadership.
It is. And, it reminds me of, Amy Cuddy talks about like having your posture, how your posture can change how you feel. And whether the research on that is valid or not, I tell you, for me, it personally works. I have learned that, if I'm hunched over and I'm not only does it affects me and how I feel, but people looking at me, they're not going to believe in me as much as if I'm sitting up proudly. And it reminds me of when my first assignment in the Air Force after graduating pilot training was as a first assignment instructor pilot in the T-37, which is the Air Force's, again, it was the primary trainer at the time, which means I was now just months from graduating pilot training myself. And now I am teaching brand new pilots who don't have a clue what they're doing, to be quite honest. It's just legit. That's true. And it's scary, but the Air Force trusted me to do this. The Air Force said, we believe in you. And they gave me the training. And when I first walked into that squadron as a first lieutenant instructor pilot, my first student outranked me. He was a captain. But I remember thinking, I have to walk down these halls with my head up and my, broad shoulders. And it's funny how it changes you a little bit. You're like, okay, I got this. Even though I had never taught a real student before, I used that experience and the trust of everyone else, again, kind of come back to multiple tools to actually have confidence where I'm not just faking it, but I got this.
Yeah, yeah. And gosh, it was almost like a light bulb went off my head. Act confident, maybe that would be my advice to people that say, I don't really feel confident around. Well, act it. And we know from physiology that just that those body mannerisms can actually get your brain thinking in more confident ways. So if that's what you want to call fake it till you make it, have at it. Tammy and I don't really like that, but I see that it's a similar idea, right? Is just act confident. People don't know that you're freaking out on the inside. This
Right.
idea of imposter syndrome, that's what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, who am I to be doing this? But they don't know that.
Right. And I like the science out there that talks about how physiologically being nervous and excited is the same response. So when I teach my children this, when they're athletics, tests, whatever, I actually tell them, even if you don't feel it, tell yourself, I'm excited. And I'll even let them say, I'm nervous, but I'm excited, because that shift in the brain changes how you approach. I mean, this, you've done this before, but somebody told me it was almost like shifting it to saying I'm excited is not going to accelerate you, but what it's going to do is remove that weight vest that you're carrying around. Like if someone was to run a race with a 12-pound weight vest, that's not going to help them. But if they take it off, like I'm excited, that's like taking that vest off and giving you your full potential instead of holding you back with the nervousness. Because when you say I'm nervous, it tells your brain that you're not prepared, you're not ready, and starts leaving all this negative thoughts going on inside of your head. And you don't need those. You need all your thought energy to be positive and towards your objective.
Well said. Well said. It's funny. I had this on my list of something to talk about. So let's go right into it.
Okay.
Usually in performance psychology, we're going to call this arousal regulation. And so, being nervous or being anxious or being fearful, and excitement. Those are all forms of arousal. And you had a nice little video on your website talking about how to get in the right spot. Sometimes you'll hear people call it the sweet spot or whatever. And so share with us a little bit about how do we know what that sweet spot looks like? And is it different for different people? What are your thoughts on that, Tammy?
I absolutely think it's different for different people, because I think what happened for me is that when I was in weapons school, a couple of the guys were like, hey, I was getting ready for a flight, and these are very intense, very important flights that, it's a big deal and a lot of preparation goes into it. And they said to me, hey, you're pinging. Like, and some people don't know what that means, like pinging off the walls, like I'm freaking out. And I thought, I am? I had no idea. And so I made a conscious effort over the next probably couple of weeks to just be more calm and more, like, I'm good, I got this, not showing the world that I was nervous is what I was interpreting from them. And I remember them saying a couple of weeks later, like, hey, you're still pinging. And I just kind of paused and I thought, well, clearly it works for me, because it does. And that's when I realized that everyone has that different state of arousal, like you're saying. And mine, I need to be a little bit more intense. I remember the same thing when I was doing gymnastics. I remember being up on the beam, doing the high beam. I had to do like 7 routines, and I had to do this front walkover. You put your hands down and then your one foot comes down and your other foot. It's a blind move. So I'd never fallen off before. I'd fallen off, but I never missed my first foot. And I remember standing at the end of the beam thinking, why do I keep getting so nervous? This is ridiculous. I've never missed. And I just casually went, and can you guess what happened? Yes, I missed. Never missed before, because I wasn't in that right arousal state. I wasn't tuned enough into what I needed to do. And you can see where this knee problem is going, rip my ACL, right? So that's where things changed for me. But it was all because I didn't understand that it needed to be in this state, which also leads me to another story that I want to share. I remember when I was going through training to be an instructor pilot yet again, and we were taking a test, and there was a whole group of us in the room, and I'm kind of going over the material, and it's an academic test. So here I am studying, and I'm pinging. Remember, I'm kind of bouncing off the walls. And another guy in my class who was very much a calm presence, that's how he operated. He came up to me and he looks at me and he goes, man, I would hate to be one of your students. And I was totally taken aback. I thought, what? I love students. Like, I love teaching them. I love figuring out what their problem is and solving it, not just kind of teaching them a blanket way. And I realized that he was expecting that this high standard I was pinging and holding myself to was the standard I would hold my students to. Now, I believe in high standards, but standards need to be reasonable for the level you're at. And for me to hold a brand new student to the standard I was holding myself would have been ridiculous, but that's what he was expecting that I was going to do. And I did not do that, but it's just interesting.
Yeah. And we were talking about this before we got on the air. Is I see a lot of leaders, especially new leaders, try to do that, right? Right. Everybody's got to be a carbon copy of Ron, right? Every way I do things is got to be the best way. And so all the people that I lead have to do it my way. And I think one of the first lessons is understand everybody comes at this a little different. And you may have students that are a little more calm. You might have some that are more pinging like you, or in between. And I think allowing for that and meeting them where they are
Right.
is important. And so that's good stuff. Let's just jump right into this idea. Earlier, I said, let's talk about formation flying. So as everybody knows, I'm a pilot, and I fly a Vans RV7. It's a little 2-seat, pretty sporty, home-built aircraft. I built it, and I'm just now starting to get into formation flying. I'm learning how to fly in formation. And so I had my first flight. It's funny that the timing of this podcast, my first flight, I had ground school, and then the first flight was Tuesday morning. So 2 days ago.
Okay.
And I can tell I was mostly a passenger in this flight. It was really kind of a demo to say, okay, this is what it looks like when you do it right. And I had, my instructor pilot is a former F-15 fighter pilot. I was in good hands. And I think for the first 15 minutes, I was terrified
Yes.
till I started breathing again. I go, wow, airplanes are not supposed to be that close.
Right.
And then it was funny because on the way back to returning to base, as they would say in the military, I got to fly a little bit. So I was flying in some what we call root formation, which is a little bit more loose.
Hmm.
But I had the controls, and at some point along the way, he says to me, he goes, loosen your grip on the stick, and I go, I'm good with the stick. I was taught as a young pilot, don't over squeeze the stick. But and then he goes, wiggle your toes, and I just laughed because my hands were doing just fine. Uh, but I think I was trying to hang on to that aircraft like a cat with my feet. I was so tense. And when he said that, I go, wow, I didn't even realize how tense I was basically from the waist down. And so, how does that get in the way? I mean, I know you know a lot about this. How does that get in the way, not only when we're flying, but also in life of maybe being too tense? And I think you like to use the word over control when we're trying to over control things in life.
Right. So yes, I just posted about this on LinkedIn. Did you see that?
I did. You can
Yes, I
see
mean,
where
it
I'm
talked about
going.
wiggle your toes. I want you to sing. And yeah, I just think that it applies so much in life. I mean, what was the actual question you wanted me to answer so I don't go
Well,
off
there was a
point?
couple of them there. Number one, being tense like this. So, most of us are not going to be flying close formation, but what about when, how does being tense get in the way of performance? And so maybe I'm doing a presentation at work and I'm really tense. How's that gonna hinder me? That'd be my first question.
Yeah, I think that the whole over control thing just it leads to a lot of robotic type maneuvers, and it's never going to come across really authentic. And that's part of the problem. I mean, you think about speeches, and there's that fine line between there's always the argument of am I going to memorize it or am I going to just be candid? People are like, well, I just want to be candid because I want to be natural. Absolutely, I understand. Depends on where you're going to speak. I mean, if you're just speaking to your own organization and it's like a staff meeting, then yes, you're not going to memorize it. But if you're doing it as a profession, you need to know it so well that when you perform it, you don't think about it. You're natural in your presence because you know it so well. I think, the preparation in advance will really help that over controlling, understanding where you need to be so that you can just kind of chill. Somebody else replied in there. They were talking about motorcycles, but it applies to a bike as well. That, if you're going over something really bumpy and you squeeze every muscle in your body and those handlebars, everything's just going to get translated through you. But if you kind of let them loosely grip in your hands, you can kind of maneuver with it a little bit better rather than getting into what I call the PIO, the pilot induced oscillations, which is essentially you fighting it and it going the other way. So then a bigger correction the other way and you end up like, whoa, and you end up, in this crazy, in the airplane, it would be up and down typically, but
Yeah. And if I don't know, it should be pretty. Can we think of times in our lives when we do this? Again, we don't have to be flying an airplane to think of times in our life when I'm going to put it in air quotes, over controlled, right? And a
yes.
lot of times that's driven by what? That's driven by emotions. And we go, whoa, we overreact one way and then we try to overreact to correct. And then all
Mhm.
of a sudden we're in a mess. And so I think this is just great. These are great tactics for life, to relax to a certain degree, right? Some arousal is good. We want
Right.
to be on alert. We want to be at our best, but we also don't want to be too tense. You used an example, and I have an example that I'll share from when I played baseball. I played college baseball for a while, and I remember my coach, and we were, at practice, and he said, "All right, I want everybody to lay down on the grass." So we laid down on our stomachs, and he said, "Put your hand out, your right hand out in front of you." And so if you can kind of picture this, we're all laying in the grass. We have our hand out in front of us. And he said, "Now I want you to take your pointing finger and I want you to tap the ground as fast as you can, as firmly as you can." And we all did that. We all go, "Okay, what is the point of this? This is ridiculous." And then he said, "Okay, now how'd that feel?" And then we talked about it. And then he says, "All right, now I want you to do the same thing, but I want you to loosen the muscles in your hand, loosen them up and try to tap as fast as you can, as loosely as you can. And it was just amazing how much quicker you can be when you're not being tense. And so you have a similar, kind of story that you used to teach pilots. And what was that?
You're talking about it for in close formation.
Yeah. So basically
Yeah,
you're
like the
just grabbing the
pencil.
stick. Yeah. Yeah.
So what I would tell students is a lot of times they didn't understand what I was saying when because they just still grip that stick a lot. And there's two things I would do. One, I would have them actually don't look at the other jet right now. I'm going to fly and I want you to look at the stick. And they would see the stick was barely moving. And the throttles were barely moving. So it only takes a little bit of contact, a little bit of input. But then I would take them back to the flight room and say, okay, I want you to pick up a pencil. I want you to wrap your hands around it as tight as you can. And I want, go write your name. Tell me if you write your name right now, how beautiful is it going to be? And they're like, it's going to be terrible. I'm like, exactly. So that's why you need to loosen your grip. You need to loosen it in formation. You need to loosen it in life. I mean, you talk about parenting or job searching or, your people and, getting a sale. I mean, whether, you're trying so hard to control this thing that it slips your grip really, because it's just not controlled anymore.
My mind, I'm going to show my age right here. My mind's going back to one of my favorite songs by the band 38 Special, Hold On Loosely. So there's your, I don't know, your mantra for today is hold on loosely. I'm an old, I say I'm a recovering control freak in life. And I think, anybody out there that might be a type A personality, as they say, or you like to label yourself as a perfectionist, you might also be a control freak. And one of the best things that I ever did was learn to let go of those things I can't control. So I like that. This is the message that's kind of coming out of this.
Can I bring something up really quick?
Yeah.
So there's a method that I've learned in the mental performance coaching piece where if there's something that's coming up, whether it's a business meeting, a game, an event, I don't know, whatever it is, you're an athlete, you have two columns and you list the struggles, things that are challenging to you. On one side, you list the things that are struggles that you can control, that you actually can do something about. And then on the other side, you list the things you can't do anything, the coach yelling, or whatever it is you actually cannot control that's bothering you. And then write it down, look at it, and then you rip it in half, and the side of the stuff you can't control, you throw in the trash. There's just something incredible about the physical act of getting rid of it, writing it down and getting rid of it, that can help people get through stuff like that.
I'm going to use that. I've not heard that, but I'll tell you what, from my experience, that you create that list, and which list do you think is going to be smaller? It's going to be that side that you actually can control. I think a lot of people really believe that they control a lot more than they do.
Yeah.
The list that you can truly control is not really that big. And once you look at that list, it simplifies things, right? You lose a lot of that stress and that burden of trying to control things you can't. So good. Right. One of the things that also came out of me learning to fly in formation, or as I start to learn this, it was emphasized over and over and over again on this first flight and even in the ground school to anticipate, right? There's so many things when you're flying in close formation that you got to be ahead of what's happening with the airplane.
Yeah.
And, in the military and even civilian aviation, we call it situational awareness. And I'm really big on this idea of not only should pilots be well-versed in situational awareness, but even in life, pay attention, be observant, ask questions, stay ahead of, try to anticipate what's going to come next. What are your thoughts on situational awareness?
It's significant. Yeah. I mean, I think that situational awareness can vastly be increased when we stop being so selfish. I think a lot of times poor situational awareness is simply coming from just looking out for ourselves. And when we expand our aperture and look beyond ourselves to what's going on around us and who are we impacting, who's impacting us, how can we kind of get in harmony, if you will. I mean, think about formation. I'm thinking about where is he going to turn, or where's she going to turn? And you don't lead it. You don't like move before, but if you're ready, then your hand's ready to pull the throttle back if they turn into you, or whatever it might be, you're kind of on top of it. Additionally, I think it's really important to deal with problems by preparing in advance. Like you're addressing that a little bit, and I'm taking it a little bit further to the whole what ifs, the negatives, like planning ahead. Because I think a lot, I think about pilot training and how many what ifs they taught us. Like, well, what if you have this emergency or that emergency? And I remember thinking as a naive young lieutenant, what on earth are we doing right now? I cannot even fly this plane, and you want me to deal with some obscure emergency that probably will never happen. But the truth is that A, it could happen and I'd be ready, but B, I'm filling up my tool bucket to prepare in advance for these actual emergencies, while at the same time, I'm mentally preparing with how I'm going to deal with it, because I'm thinking ahead. If this bad thing happens, what's my mental state going to be? We're going to go to aviate, navigate, communicate, which just simply is breaking down things to like, oh, let's fly the plane first. Like, and you can apply that to life as well. I'm just going to fly the plane and then navigate. Where am I going? And then lastly, I'm going to communicate, because a lot of people do the communicate first. When you really got to aviate, you got to take care of yourself first, and then where are you going to go, and then communicate about it. But there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a thought and I think it just escaped me. Well, maybe it'll come back to me. One of the things I was going to say, that when we go back to situational awareness, and you said, you know, stop being so selfish and kind of look around you. And I was laughing inside, because how many people have experienced that person that is, I don't know, maybe texting on their phone, and they're, walking down the sidewalk, and they stop right in the middle of the sidewalk, and they got their head buried in their phone. And it's like you run into them, and it's like, do you even realize there's people around you? This
Yeah.
would be zero situational awareness, and
Exactly.
one of my pet peeves.
Yeah, situational awareness is usually, and taking back to the selfish piece, whenever I struggle with something, I always start internally and think, am I being selfish somehow? Because usually I can find, if I'm angry or frustrated, it's usually a high standard I'm holding or something that's unrealistic. It's my expectation management is really terrible. And I pause and I go, what is the intent of the other person or whatever's happening? And kind of marry that all up. And it's so much more peaceful to handle the problem and move forward than if you just keep kind of butting heads and being like, no, I'm right. I'm angry. I just let it go, work through it.
Yeah. And I remembered what I was going to say. One of the things that I coach on is performing well under pressure. And, I say exactly what you're saying, and that think about things that could go wrong. And I have some of my friends that say, well, that's just being negative, Ron. And I said, we can't prepare for everything that's going to go wrong. I mean, there's going to be things that we go, all right, didn't even think of that. But the more things that we can be ready for, the best thing you can do when something unexpected happens. Well, I would say it's not going to be unexpected. You go, oh, I thought about that ahead of time.
Yeah.
That is when you're gonna nail it under pressure more times than not. And then those times when it happens and it's off script, hopefully you have some kind of a mental model to lean on, to kind of ad lib. But that's part of the game. That's part of life. You can't prepare for everything. And I know certainly in the military, you guys do a lot of training around that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, people, it's funny because they think it's a waste of time. Well, I don't want to, because they live in hope land. They're just hoping that thing that they know could happen won't happen. And then when it does, they have no idea what to do. It's not a waste of time to I'm not saying you can't prepare for everything, just like you said, but pick one or two things, and then eventually you're going to build up that toolbox. So
I like it. All right, let's start to kind of wind this down a little bit, even though I could talk about this for a while. How can people work with you, Tammy? Anything exciting on your radar that maybe you're working on? How can people get a hold of you and hire you?
Yeah, probably the best way to get a hold of me is if they're on LinkedIn, just find me on LinkedIn, Tammy Barlette, or email would be the best. It's Tammy at athenasvoiceusa.com. So Athena is in the goddess of wisdom and war, voice as in speaking, and then USA.com. They can find me there. And yeah, I'm just working, have a couple speeches coming up that I'm working on, and also just working through the mental performance for aviation. And I continue to do more studying on that, because I just think there needs to be more in that area.
I like that you say that, because one of the things I think people don't make the connection is, a lot of times when I talk about performance coaching, they say, well, it's just for elite, the elite athletes or elite whatever. Those are the only people that really need to perform well under pressure. And I say, oh, no, 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 no. And so I think you would probably echo that, right? This is for everybody.
It absolutely is for everybody. And I honestly think that sometimes it's what is holding people back is this piece of it. So they could perform much better than they are, and they're not giving themselves credit, because I think a lot of things that came naturally to me can be taught. And that's what happened when I was building my perseverance speech. I thought, well, I can tell these perseverance stories, but I don't know how I did it. And I couldn't build the speech until I actually dissected what did I actually do different that made me successful, unlike other people. And it took quite some time. And I actually had to reverse research it. Basically, I went through a mental performance coaching program and went, oh, that's what I was doing. And I didn't even know it. So I could teach it to others, because, it doesn't do me any good if I just say, just do it, like Nike, just do it. It's not helpful to people. So I learned some tools of how did I do it.
I love that. And the word I use is operationalize it, right? A lot of people have some wisdom, and just like you said, "No, I don't know how I did that." Well, start thinking about how, if you had to do a 5-step process to do that, what would it look
Yeah.
like? And that's what I call operationalizing it. And then you can teach others. So why? I mean, the point is, can you figure this out on your own? Yeah. Not to, certainly discount Tammy, but if Tammy and I can do it, you guys can do it. And we're not superheroes here. And so, but here's the thing. It's nice when you can leverage what other people have done, the legwork they've done to explain that to you. You can, if you want to use the word hack, I don't like the word hack, but if you want to call that a hack, so be it. Learn from others. I think that's great advice. All right, let's go to the last question. Tammy, what's your greatest failure and what did you learn from it?
Well, I find that question interesting. And I find it interesting because I think that what my actual greatest failure is different than the time I felt like the biggest failure. Because the time I felt like the biggest failure was definitely not the biggest failure moment in my life. So I'll talk a little bit about this. Let me start by saying when I was 18, I remember thinking, okay, I'm an adult now, I'm choosing my path. And then going, well, how do I know what my path is? This is so difficult. And my thought was, well, if I choose a path and it gets hard, then that's not the right path. And wow, was that terrible self-advice. Because I've learned over decades of experience and gaining wisdom that if I do solid goal setting, like I really take time to decide whether a goal is worth it or not and why I want it and what my personal core values are. And if it all lines up, once I set down the path, if it gets challenging and I have failures, that is a really good sign that I am on the right path. That is, if you want to grow as a person in life, I'm on the right path. So going to my biggest failure in life, I think truly is not taking opportunities that came about because I had imposter syndrome, because I didn't think I was qualified. I didn't raise my hand. I thought, well, if I'm good enough, they'll ask me. Oh, that's so dumb. But it is what it is, right? So you learn from it. Now, what was my actual, what did I feel? When did I feel like the biggest failure? Oh, it was an ugly moment. It was truly an ugly moment. I was on what should have been, and you can see where this is going, should have been the last check ride in my entire Air Force career. And it was a 2-ship low level in the T-38, which we don't do a ton of, but that's fine. It's a mission we accomplished. They can give me a check ride enough if they want. That's no problem. I had an international student on my wing who was on the, they call it CAP, Commander's Awareness Program. So he was struggling. I thought, oh, wow. Okay. Well, talk about giving me the challenge at the end of the career. And I made it through the entire flight. I was coming up over the field for landing. And I saluted the student off as I went into the brake to land. I'm like, oh, it's over. I went into the final turn and I supposedly, I didn't see it. It was the instructor that saw it, and there's no warning bell. So supposedly I oversped my flaps by 6 knots. I think it was about 6. it's supposed to be 220 and I was at 226 because the flaps were in transition. And so at the certain point, they weren't quite, whatever. The bottom line is I failed my check ride. It was supposed to be my last check ride in the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. I had never failed a check ride in my entire life. And I could not believe it. And the way that it was handled was really quite appalling, but I took every step and I just went along with it. And I'll say that night was rough because I was extremely embarrassed. And I would tell people what I did and other instructors as I was trying to like deal with this. And they're like, oh, that's all you did. I've done this. And you'd hear all these stories. I'm like, you just oversped I did that once in a check ride. The guy didn't say anything. He just said, I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. It was still a rule and I broke it. So it is what it is. It was horrible though. That was absolutely where I felt like the biggest failure in my whole life, but I accomplished the check ride again and I passed. So there you go.